Unit 3 Politics, we continue to discuss public policy. What the people want. What is the plan? Well, one of the Trump administration's plans for the government is to institute tariffs to boost the American economy. Contentious, controversial, easy to criticize, not always easy to defend, but definitely something that has occurred time and time again throughout American history. Now, this doesn't necessarily tie into the three big points of the transition team: immigration, tackling the government debt, and shrinking the government, but it kind of does. So let's talk tariffs. China makes stuff. The United States makes stuff. Let's focus on phones. Make them in the factories. They got workers. They sell them to us. We buy them, and we ship our dollars overseas by purchasing imported cheap goods. And those goods are very cheap because of cheap labor that America often has hard times competing against. And so our dollars fly out of the country. Sure, we get the phones, but our dollars are going over there, boosting their economy, allowing them to employ more workers, thus them being able to grow their economy, while ours does not necessarily grow. We get phones, they become more productive. They build more factories, stores, workers being employed. The opposite happens over here because our factories are unable to compete against the cheap labor of China. We can make phones. We can make everything that they make, but it costs us more because we pay people more because there's a higher standard of living. They, because they pay for cheap labor, are able to sell the phones for $1,000 in America with health benefits and the cost of living being higher. For our companies to produce those same phones, we have to charge $1,300. Thus, it's easy for the consumer to make the choice of $1,000 phone. It's the same phone. Purchase it, import it. As a consumer, you're more worried about your family, your well-being, than really developing the American economy and worrying about, oh, what if China becomes a superpower because I'm buying my phone over there? Sorry, I just got to get food on the plate. Thus, it becomes hard for American factories to compete. They can't compete. They can't operate. They don't employ workers. So it hurts our economy overall. Don't blame the consumer, just trying to do what they can do. So the government intervenes, institutes a tariff, which is a tax on an import. If China wants to sell their phone here, before they can bring it in the doors, they have to pay an extra tax. They have to pay to play. Before that thing can enter port of entry, they have to pay a tax. Let's say 50%. So they ship their phones over. They want to sell them for $1,000. Well, they've got to pay a 50% tax on importing that. So that means they'll have to raise their price to make the same money that they made. So in the end, it's roughly a $1,500 phone. Now, it is a tax on the Chinese company that's importing it, but that tax basically then gets shifted to the consumer because the company, rather than leave the phone at $1,000, just increases the price. And so the consumer then ends up having to pay $1,500. So the tax burden ultimately falls on the consumer. And that is a big point that we have to understand, that will be pointed out often. While the tax is technically on the Chinese importer, they simply just raise the price and pass the tax burden off to the consumer. So now, as a consumer in America buying a phone, you have a choice between the $1,500 Chinese phone or the $1,300 phone. Well, now you're going to buy American. This is not great for the consumer because ultimately you're paying at least $300 more now for phones. So again, while a tariff is a tax on the importer, the tax burden then just gets passed off onto you. And so you either pay more for the imported good or you pay more for the domestic good made in America. So it's great for the worker, the factory, the domestic provider here in America, not so great for the consumer. And you're going to hear that pointed out time and time again as tariffs are discussed, because ultimately what is happening is you're indirectly being taxed. That money is then being used technically to jumpstart the domestic production of phones. For all intents and purposes, it is a government subsidy to American manufacturers at the cost of the consumer. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. If you want to use tariffs to boost the domestic economy and domestic manufacturing, there is a cost, and the cost is bared by the consumer. And this is going to be pointed out. And you see these slam dunks on Twitter often in these media hot takes, people that are anti-Trump administration, neoliberals, libertarians. Tariffs are simply taxes on consumers. They're not necessarily taxes on the importer, although they do hurt the Chinese economy, who is trying to import the goods because they have to raise the prices. And when they raise the prices, they're likely to sell fewer goods, make fewer goods, fewer employees working, possibly hurt their economy. So again, for all intents and purposes, tariffs are truly a tax on the consumer, but those monies do go ultimately to, in one way, shape, or form, domestic manufacturers in a roundabout, subsidized way. So it's not an ultimate loss because the money is going to stay here for the most part. Now, again, this idea, yes, you are right, it is a tax on consumers. And it is true from a selfish, resentful perspective. In the short term, it is painful. But that is a narrow-minded, straw man argument. It doesn't see the big picture. It doesn't look to the long term. It is true. In the short run, we are going to experience pain and hurt. But our posterity, our future generations, our children, our children's children could benefit, as has been the case throughout the last 200 years in America when we have instituted tariffs. It hurts in the moment. It is painful, but there are long-term gains because by making this investment, by making this sacrifice, we allow our domestic manufacturers to compete and grow, and throughout time, they become bigger and stronger and more competitive. Costs will ultimately come down, but our economy will grow, and our competitors' economies in other nations thus will shrink due to the sacrifice that you make by paying higher taxes. Yes, tariffs are a tax, but it is also an investment in our future. And as we grow manufacturing throughout this country again, and people are working again, they shop again, and our economy grows. And not only does our economy grow, but when we manufacture domestically, we manufacture products that are vital to the security and the prosperity of our nation. We're no longer dependent on foreign countries for the microchips and processors that we need to take the next step into the next century. We're no longer dependent on pharmaceutical companies that are foreign. When we need medicine, we have it here. When we're in desperate need of a medicine, we have it here. And when we have it here, we can test it here. We aren't reliant on foreign nations that may not necessarily have the pharmaceutical standards that we have. These are all benefits to you making the sacrifice of paying this tax. And yes, it is a tax, but there's more to it than that. So, a tariff, pretty much a tax that you are going to pay in a roundabout way. But the result is we will manufacture here, we will create more jobs. But there is another layer to the Trump administration's public policy, their plan for tariffs, because it's not just isolation of tariffs. They are also proposing that if you are now paying this tax in a roundabout way through tariffs, to offset that tax, to make it so that you still have money, because no one wants to pay another tax, they propose that we remove the income tax. So you get all of your paycheck every time. The government doesn't withhold any of your money. They don't take any of your money. You get $20 an hour, you get $20 an hour. Keep it all. Don't worry about it. You could spend that $20. So, in theory, the removal of the income tax could quite possibly offset the increase in pricing that we have to pay due to the tariffs. Makes the pain, at the very least, a little less worse. Whether it comes out equal or not, it's a little less painful. That sacrifice for future generations, it's a lot less painful. Now, when you have no income tax, you have more money to spend, you buy more, so the stores are buying more, the economy grows, and if people are shopping more as demand increases, more productivity, more factories, more workers. Now, you could make the argument that this is really just equal. You could make the argument that it's the same as when we didn't have a tariff. We still have the same amount of money to spend. There isn't really any change. Right? We got rid of the income tax to make up for it. So it's not like all of a sudden we got rid of the income tax and you're super rich and you're spending more and buying more and everything's through the roof. In reality, it's probably about the same as we get rid of the income tax with tariffs. It's probably the same as keeping the income tax and having no tariffs. You could make that argument. But there is a difference here. So if we don't have tariffs and we buy from China, probably have the same money as if we are paying tariffs, but without an income tax. But there is a difference, and that is when you shop domestically. The goods that you're going to buy with the tariffs and no income tax plan, you are going to buy domestically as opposed to buying from China and supporting Chinese production and Chinese factories and the Chinese economy. No tariffs means you're going to help the growth of China. But if we go the route of tariffs and no income tax, you buy domestically within the nation, locally, and we grow firms and factories and workers in America. And as those factories grow and they employ more people and innovate, those people now are spending more. And it will, through time, grow the American economy, in theory. Simply what this tariff or tax that we will have to bear does is it gives our domestic American manufacturers a fighting chance, a fair fight. They can compete now. They can innovate now with their opponents in China. And as we have competition, prices decrease. As American manufacturers and firms compete with Chinese manufacturers and firms, one of the ways that they get you to buy their goods is by A, somehow lowering the cost of their production, which then you pay less, or simply lowering the cost at the sales point to get you to buy their goods. Ultimately, that then again makes this not so painful. Yeah, you're paying a tax. Prices of goods are going to go up, but maybe they won't go up as much as you think when we have American companies competing against Chinese companies. And when we have a fair fight, it's not just phone company A versus phone company B in America. We could also have phone company C in America, furthering the competition. Because once you put that tariff in place, many different firms can open up and can compete in America. And as competition increases, prices decrease again, making that roundabout tax through tariffs that you are paying, that price increase, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's not such a terrible cost to pay for the future of our nation. Oh, by the way, if you're not paying taxes, you're not filing taxes. How nice, how beautiful would that be? Where you don't have to document all of your taxes, because now taxing simply happens at the port of entry when goods are imported in. The tariffs are taken care of by the government. Taxes are taken care of by the government. The foreign importer has to file the paperwork. The government and the foreign importer, manufacturer, deal with the taxing situation. Well, you sit back and relax and never have to worry about income tax. How much money did I make this year? How much do I got to calculate? What's all the paperwork I got to do? What do I got to document? You never have to worry about taxes ever again. Ever, 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 ever. No, not even entering your mind. How much of a relief will that be? You don't have to worry about the IRS knocking on your door. You don't have to worry about getting fined. You don't have to worry about getting investigated. You don't have to worry about filling out every single piece of paper and making sure that's correct. All that's gone. All the taxes are simply happening at port of entry on the coast as goods are imported. What a benefit that would be. Again, this was probably a little more too pro-tariff, but it's also pro-change, pro-opportunity, pro-risk, trying something new. Obviously, what we have been doing over the last 4 years, 10 years, 15 years isn't really boosting the American economy. It's time for a moonshot. It's time to take a chance. It's time to take a risk. What could we possibly lose? If it doesn't go wrong, fine. But sometimes you can't be afraid to go for the big play. It is that time. It is that moment. This is a big, significant point in history. And it's going to take bold moves like we have seen from previous generations and previous administrations and previous American leaders. Or we could just sit back, status quo, more of the same, don't change anything, and just hope that things work out or that things don't fall apart any more worse than they are. Criticize, defend, it's up to you.